Hey, what's going on? Welcome to Tim's IT Straight Talk. Tim Werner here. And I want to talk about handling classroom disruptions. This lesson is particularly useful if you're a trainer, if you're an adult educator in particular. But I submit it can be useful to anybody who wants to develop their personal brand. I'm thinking of other topics in this YouTube series that are related to this one. Building your personal brand would certainly be one. But at any rate, you find yourself in a classroom environment, whether it's in person, that's one context, but more commonly nowadays, it'll be on Zoom or Teams or some virtual setting. My most important fail-safe to ward against handling classroom disruptions is if you're fortunate enough to have good moderation. Oh boy, what a difference that makes. When I'm asked to give a talk, one of my preliminary questions is always, will I have a moderator? And that's important for a couple reasons. One, so I don't miss anybody's question, because the moderator is there to aggregate questions and feed them to me. Appreciate that very much. Another is the very practical aspect of handling disruptions, which in an electronic context over Zoom or Teams or whatever, is most of the time innocent but still disruptive. For instance, if the moderation does not have everybody auto-mute when they come into the room, somebody comes in with an unmuted mic and there's all sorts of chaos going on their side, that's clearly immediately disruptive to the training and to the learning experience. I had a horrible situation a year or two ago giving a presentation at a Microsoft Azure users group where the moderator didn't know how to use the Zoom controls. Oh, that was fatal, because on that particular night, there were a couple folks who came in to just bust up the meeting. It was like a denial of service, where they came into the meeting, they joined the event, and began berating and being abusive and just literally trying to knock the session offline. And I didn't have administrative privileges in the Zoom room. The moderator didn't know yet what they were doing with Zoom, so we were really hamstrung. And in that case, the attackers won, because I was like, okay, I'm going to not continue anymore. Sorry. And we rescheduled it, and the moderator did get on top of the controls, and that's not happened again, and I'm convinced it wouldn't happen again. But boy, that good moderation makes all the difference in the world. Now, things are quite different when you're in a live classroom or in a live room with other human beings for a period of time. I find it useful to get a feel for the motivations of the disruptor. You see, they may be a well-meaning individual who just are so into it, they may not have a good filter of appropriateness, of good social behavior. My filter sometimes doesn't work. I think it's related to my autism. So that's one possibility where you're like, okay, as an instructor, I need to do something about this. Another common scenario is somebody who, a know-it-all type student who wants to show off how much they know, especially if it's a group of people from the same company who are in the same training class. You might have a know-it-all, and they're constantly interrupting and pontificating, going on for way too long. These things happen, and getting a read on their motivation is critical, because then you can go on to next steps. I think this video is also related to my other video here called Multi-Channel Public Speaking, in which I talk about my approach to where when I'm presenting, I have multiple channels working in parallel in my brain. One is the content, another is the meta, how am I doing for time and flow and pacing and environment, and the third is the audience. And when you've got a disruption, that's going to hit my meta track and my audience track. And of course, it'll cascade to content if it gets intense enough. So my next suggestion is to be brave. You got to do it. I know that confrontation is difficult for most humans, But the bottom line is you are the responsible party as the trainer, as the instructor, as the leader, facilitator, speaker, whatever title you want to give yourself. It's important to adopt the buck stops here approach. I have a reproduction of, I can't remember which US president it was. It might have been Dewey, who had this sign on his desk, the buck stops here. And my daughter noticed it in my office here just a few days ago. And so she asked me about it, and I told her that notion of passing the buck being part of the human experience. And a sign of maturity is the buck stops here. I'm going to take action on this. So, of course, the next logical question is, how do you take action if you're in a live training environment or online, and you've got this disruption happening from somebody who's probably well-meaning? If they're not well-meaning, that was the case with the Zoom bombers I had that I told you about, but chances are it's well-meaning or at least neutral. The person's motivations are at least neutral. What the heck do you actually do? Well, one is embrace control. Like I said, the buck stops here, although it's uncomfortable and awkward, understanding I need to do something about this because the disruptions are reducing the effectiveness of my training, and my students are principal above everyone else, and they're losing out here, so I need to do something. That's important, that commitment. From there, things that I've done, particularly with the know-it-all type student, making an appeal to their ego, not sarcastically, honestly, but thanking them for their contributions and letting them know they're valuable. Some of their feedback may be valuable, actually. But by appealing to their ego, sometimes that's enough. Just for them to be recognized as an authority or as a perceived authority is enough for them to settle down. I might actually make the statement, again, politeness is important, of let's give some other people a chance to participate as well. And if those things don't work, then I need to talk to the person, not publicly, but privately outside of class. Call for a break, and then surreptitiously ask the person for a word. And just, again, the idea is to be direct but polite and say, look, I really appreciate your input. It's valuable. It's clear you know what you're doing here. But the degree to which we're interacting is eroding the training for the rest of the class because it's taking us too far outside of the scope that I've designed for us. So could you maybe hold questions until a break and see me at break, or you've got my contact information, and then go about it that way? That's pretty effective as well, I've found. Yeah, let me think if there's anything else that comes to my head on handling classroom disruptions. Well, having a sense of humor is important. You know, it's pretty clear when you're at the front of a room, you can get a nice feel for how people are. That's something I miss about the Zoom-based approach, the distance learning. The greatest benefit of Zoom and distance learning is that my students are from all over the globe, and that helps cultivate a worldwide perspective, as I talked about in my last video. But on the other hand, there's nothing like being physically in the room with the people, because you get a bird's eye perspective of where everybody is. You can see people obviously distracted, obviously not engaged, or on the other hand, very engaged, very attuned. You can see people whose eyes are starting to droop, which may have nothing to do with the training and everything to do with the fact that they're a working adult and they're stressed and they've got a lot of plates spinning at once. But when there's a disruptor, everybody feels when it goes overboard, and I can immediately see on the faces of the person's peers that they're unhappy, like, oh, what is this, you know? And again, it's important for me to recognize that, not publicly, but in my brain, and resolve that, okay, I've got to steel up the old spine, and I've got to step up here and make sure that the buck stops with me and put a stop to this. Because, again, it's a total distraction and winds up being a waste of everybody's time if I think, oh, the disruptor will just stop, or oh, this will pass in a moment. No. Got to be proactive, got to keep the training, got to keep the flow going. Yes, I'm injecting a lot of my own experience here, and my own philosophy is that I don't want to waste anybody's time, including my own, and I want to make sure to deliver as much value per unit time as I possibly can. And anytime we're trying to address frequent disruptions is time away from the good stuff, the content and the knowledge and skills transfer to the learners. So with that, I will call this video complete. Thank you again for your participation. Pardon if I sound drowsy. It's because not too long ago I was sleeping. Takes me a little while to ramp up the old engines with the help of espresso. So with that, I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.